A little boy with bruises on his arms stood silently outside a church in Portland, Oregon, clutching a piece of paper that read, "My name is Noah. Please help me." But the church doors stayed shut. Rain soaked his shoes. Cars passed. No one stopped until a retired Marine with a limp walked by, his German shepherd halting beside him. The dog sniffed the boy once, then growled, not in warning, but in recognition. And without a word, the man knelt, picked up the boy's paper, and whispered, "We've got you now." What happened next would uncover a stolen childhood, awaken a city's sleeping conscience, and prove that sometimes angels wear scars and walk on four legs. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the bell, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a rescue written by fate. Portland doesn't forget nights like this. Portland, Oregon, in early spring, often wore the colors of contradiction. The air was still cool, tinged with the breath of passing rain, yet the late afternoon sun peeked shyly through bands of cloud, casting golden light across the damp sidewalks. The scent of cherry blossoms drifted lazily through the breeze that rustled the flags along Morrison Park, where mothers pushed strollers and older men in fishing hats read newspapers on long wooden benches. Among them, Ethan Miller walked with a quiet rhythm, leaning slightly on his right side, each step measured, a man shaped by war and its long, echoing aftermath. Ethan was in his early 40s, with a lean frame made leaner by injury. His skin had the kind of ruggedness that came from too many desert suns and too little rest. Faint scars traced the bridge of his right hand, and though he wore civilian clothes, jeans, a faded army green jacket, and hiking boots, he moved like someone who had once lived by precision. His left knee bore the mark of a shrapnel wound from a mission gone sideways outside Kandahar, which is why today, as with most days, he leaned on a cane made of polished walnut, custom-fitted at the VA hospital. But it was the German shepherd walking proudly beside him who drew the attention of most passers-by. Max, a 6-year-old retired military K-9, was the picture of vigilance. His coat, a tapestry of sable and tan, shimmered in the sunlight, and his deep amber eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. He moved close to Ethan's side, ears always half-cocked, tail low but steady. Max had been with Ethan through 3 deployments. He'd sniffed out explosives, dragged wounded soldiers from fire zones, and once, in the dead of night, stood between Ethan and a man with a blade. He had a slight limp in his back leg, a healed tendon injury from Syria, but it never slowed him down. Today's walk wasn't for reconnaissance or exercise. It was to keep the ghosts quiet. Ethan had just finished another grueling round of physical therapy at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center 2 blocks away. His knee ached in that familiar grinding way, but worse than that was the heaviness in his chest, a strange emptiness that always followed the routine, the kind of hollowness that made coffee taste like dirt and daylight feel artificial. Max, attuned to such silences, walked closer, his flank brushing Ethan's pant leg as if to say, "You're not alone." They approached the intersection near the old bus stop, where a lamppost leaned slightly, as if tired from years of standing. The sun slanted low, golden light reflecting off the red brick of the sidewalk, warming the earth-toned buildings around them. There was a small playground across the street, swings creaking, a girl in yellow climbing a rope bridge, a father in flannel lifting his toddler to the monkey bars. Ethan paused at the edge of the crosswalk, letting his weight shift to the good leg, when Max let out a sharp bark, not a nervous yap, but a single clipped note of alarm. His ears shot forward, body suddenly tense. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, though he was already looking up, scanning. Across the street, on the opposite sidewalk, a woman in her early 40s hurried past, her grip tight on the wrist of a young boy. The woman's appearance was unremarkable at first glance. Shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back into a tidy ponytail, pale blue blouse tucked into dark jeans, worn brown flats. Her posture was stiff, her pace brisk. The boy she led by the hand couldn't have been older than 6. Thin, too thin perhaps, with shaggy brown hair and a small backpack swinging against his side. He didn't struggle, but he didn't walk easily either. He was half-dragged, half-guided. Ethan's eyes locked with the boy's for a fraction of a second. That was all. But sometimes a second is enough. The child's gaze pierced right through him. Large, storm-gray eyes, wide and hollow. Then, in the blink of a heartbeat, the boy raised one hand behind his back, palm inward, and held up 3 fingers. The signal was quick, almost invisible. Almost. But not to someone like Ethan. His breath caught. 3 fingers, palm inward, behind the back. A signal developed and taught in hostage response protocol, created for victims who cannot speak, who need help without alerting their captors. Max growled again, low and soft, as if he too had understood. Ethan didn't move for several seconds. He watched as the woman and the boy disappeared around the corner of the white-painted boundary wall of Building 17, part of a temporary housing unit designated for transitioning military families. No one else on the street noticed anything out of the ordinary. No cries, no sudden scenes. But Ethan's training had taught him to trust small things. A flick of the eye, a shift in posture, the tightness of a grip. He remembered all too vividly the look on a child's face from a failed rescue mission in Fallujah, and how that haunted him more than the bullets ever had. He looked down. Max was staring toward the building, tense but still. Ethan shifted his weight off the cane and crossed the street without another word. Building 17 had a quiet, almost sterile appearance. Off-white siding, iron gate at the front, no doorbell, no activity. The curtains on the ground floor window fluttered slightly, and just as Ethan lifted his phone to take a discreet photo, the curtain shifted. A hand, small and pale, pulled it shut. He checked the time, 5:13 p.m. There were too many unknowns. The woman could be his mother. The boy could be playing. But something gnawed at him, those eyes. That signal. He turned away and walked quickly toward home, just a block away. Inside, his house smelled of black coffee and worn leather. The walls bore the quiet stoicism of a man who once lived out of a rucksack. Maps of Syria and Iraq, a framed photo of a military unit beneath a sunset, a dusty metal that hadn't been polished in years. Max padded in after him and sat near the kitchen door, alert but quiet. Ethan opened a drawer and pulled out a small set of compact binoculars, the ones he used for bird watching behind Forest Park. Moments later, he was back at the same street corner, crouching behind a hedge. He scanned the building through the lenses, zeroing in on the same window. Nothing. Then movement, a small hand gripping the edge of the curtain again. Not moving, not trembling, just holding, still and fearful. Ethan lowered the binoculars. His heart beat slow but heavy. He had seen that look before, not just in children in war zones, but in ones the world forgot. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. This was no longer just a passing concern. A line had been crossed. A decision made. He would not walk away. The sky over Portland had turned a deeper gray by early evening, clouds thickening like wet wool, cloaking the sun's departure in silence. A faint drizzle hung in the air, not quite falling but heavy enough to blur the window panes and gather in the crevices of sidewalks. Ethan Miller stood beneath the overhang of a modest coffee shop across the street from Building 17, one hand around a lukewarm paper cup of black coffee, the other resting absently on the leash looped around his wrist. Max sat beside him, motionless but alert, his ears pointed forward, tail still, eyes fixed on the apartment complex like a sentinel waiting for movement in enemy territory. The rain hadn't dampened Max's tension. He had been this way since they'd returned to the building, his entire body drawn tight like a bowstring. Ethan didn't speak to him. He didn't need to. 6 years of shared service had formed a wordless communication between man and dog that not even the silence of war could shatter. Across the street, apartment 12B sat on the corner of the first floor. Its white blinds were drawn closed, and the porch light hadn't turned on despite the creeping dusk. Ethan had watched the building for over 40 minutes now, observing the comings and goings. A young couple who lived above, returning with groceries and laughing softly. A mail carrier, slim with a high ponytail and a clipboard pressed to her chest, tapping on doors in the fading light. But not a shadow stirred in 12B. No television flickered behind the curtains. No child's laughter. No voice. Just quiet, too much of it. Max let out a low, gravelly growl. Ethan looked down sharply. Max's fur bristled along his spine, a silent alarm. "Let's go," Ethan muttered, tossing the coffee into a trash bin and crossing the street with Max trotting silently at his side. As they neared the building, Max slowed, nose twitching. He sniffed along the sidewalk, the edge of the hedges, then padded toward the window of 12B. Without hesitation, he placed his front paws against the sill and let out a low whine, followed by a muffled bark. It wasn't loud, but it was firm, purposeful. He began to scratch at the base of the window, something he had never done outside of active rescue training. Ethan froze. He remembered that bark. Not the usual stranger alert, or "I see a squirrel" noise, but the specific, low-pitched signal Max had used during search and rescue missions when locating someone in distress. It was the same sound he'd made in Syria 3 years ago when they had pulled 3 injured children from a collapsed bakery after a rocket strike. Ethan's mind drifted involuntarily to that day. Smoke, dust, blood. The building had been rubble, its walls blown out. They'd lost radio contact. Ethan, ignoring orders, let Max lead them in blind. The dog stopped in front of a mound of shattered brick and broken wood, whining and barking just as he did now. Beneath the wreckage, the children had huddled, cut, bruised, but alive. Ethan remembered one girl gripping Max's neck with tiny fingers, whispering, "I knew someone would come." He shook off the memory and returned to the present. Max scratched again, nose brushing the window frame. Ethan crouched beside him, pretending to tie his bootlace, and leaned close. There a sound, barely audible. A creak, a shuffle. Not the footsteps of an adult, but the soft shifting weight of someone small moving across carpet. He straightened, his breath a cloud in the cool air. His eyes flicked to the corner of the window where the curtain was slightly misaligned. In the narrow crack between fabric and glass, he caught a flash of something, skin, a sliver of forehead, then gone. He pulled out his phone, snapped a quick photo of the window, and sent it to his old unit buddy, Joe Carlson. Joe was a stocky, no-nonsense man in his 50s with deep-set eyes and a nose crooked from 2 breaks. He worked IT security for the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs now, which gave him access to things most people couldn't get without subpoenas. He had always been the guy you called when things got gray. A few minutes later, Ethan's phone buzzed. "Joe, name on lease, Diane Taylor. Age 42. No registered dependents. No record of child custody or guardianship. No school enrollment within 5 miles. You might be onto something." Ethan stared at the message. His gut twisted. Max sat down beside him again, tail thudding lightly once against the sidewalk, then still. He looked at his dog. "You feel it too, huh?" Max tilted his head, a movement Ethan had long interpreted as agreement. They circled around the building, keeping to the shadows. Ethan noticed a black car parked in the back lot, a dusty sedan with an expired registration sticker, and 2 empty child booster seats in the rear. The interior was clean, too clean. No toys, no books, no wrappers. It felt like a stage set rather than a real life. Ethan made a note of the plate number, then continued walking. He passed by the laundry room windows, where a dim light flickered. There inside was an older woman folding clothes. She wore a pink sweater and yoga pants, gray hair pulled into a ponytail. Ethan knocked gently on the glass and gestured politely. The woman looked up, startled, then opened the side door. "Hi, sorry to bother you," Ethan said with a calm voice. "Name's Ethan. I live 2 blocks over. You wouldn't happen to know the woman in 12B, would you?" The woman tilted her head, curious but guarded. "Diane? She moved in maybe 6, 7 months ago. Quiet type. Keeps to herself. She have a son?" The woman blinked. "Not that I've seen. Just her. Comes and goes at odd hours, real early or real late. Once or twice I saw her with a little boy, but I assumed it was her nephew or something. Never talked to him." "Thanks," Ethan said with a grateful nod. "Just curious. I thought I saw the kid near the park and wanted to make sure he's okay." The woman nodded slowly. "Hope everything's all right." As Ethan walked away, he noticed Max looking back at the window again. The dog stood still, ears forward, body rigid. Then he let out a second, sharper bark, almost a command. Ethan turned, just in time to see the curtain on the second window flicker. Once, quickly. Someone had seen them. The rain had lifted overnight, leaving behind a glassy sheen on the city's surfaces. Cars gleamed like beetles beneath the morning sun, and the sidewalks of Portland's northeast district glistened with reflected light. The city breathed differently after rainfall, like it had finally exhaled after holding something in for too long. But Ethan Miller wasn't thinking about the weather. His thoughts were fixed firmly on apartment 12B. At 7:34 a.m., he sat hunched over his desk, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The room smelled faintly of graphite and dust. Files, maps, and a spiral notebook lay spread before him in meticulous order. Max dozed near the front door, one eye closed, the other half open, ears twitching every few minutes like satellite dishes catching phantom frequencies. Ethan stared at the residential data pulled from last night. The name, Diane Taylor, age 42. Lease began 8 months ago. No listed dependents. No school district affiliations. No insurance policy claims or pediatric appointments. No linked tax records for childcare. The boy didn't exist, at least not on paper. He opened an encrypted messaging app on his laptop and keyed in a contact labeled simply Carlson. Joe Carlson had always gone by his last name, even during boot camp. He was the type of man who refused to call things by their first names, emotions included. Now working quietly in IT for a Veterans Administration contractor, Joe retained access to deeper municipal systems that most civilians couldn't touch. Ethan typed, "Need a background dig. Residential unit, 12B, Morrison Complex. Name on lease, Diane Taylor. I think we're looking at an off-grid custody situation. Possibly abduction." Seconds later, a reply blinked onto the screen. "Can you talk?" Ethan clicked call. Joe's voice crackled through, low and unhurried. "You think she's keeping the kid illegally?" "I saw the boy. He signaled distress, military-style code. He doesn't show up on any public record. She's got no dependent declarations." Joe exhaled. Ethan could picture him leaning back in a chair, probably with a toothpick in his mouth. "I remember a Diane Taylor. Not personally, but the name came up years ago. Some minor alert in Illinois. Let me dig." Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the photo on the wall. It showed 3 men and 1 dog in desert fatigues, dust caked across their faces, standing on a rooftop at sunset. The man to Ethan's left was Joe, holding a pair of headphones. The man to the right, a medic named Alan, was long gone now. Joe's voice brought him back. "Here we go. Diane Taylor, alias confirmed, real name Rachel Young. Suspended in 2019 from a private child counseling center in Chicago after multiple parental complaints. Nothing stuck in court. Moved through 3 states in 4 years. Changed names twice. Registered here under her middle name and maiden surname." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Any criminal record?" "Nothing prosecutable. Only 1 formal complaint. An employee at her last daycare accused her of unusual fixation on a boy named Noah Carter. Sound familiar?" Ethan sat upright. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Can you find anything on Noah Carter? Missing persons report." A pause. Then, "Yeah. Filed 2 years ago. Chicago PD. 4-year-old boy. Last seen in Lincoln Park with mother, Emily Carter. No ransom. No witnesses. Police suspected the mother at first, but dropped it for lack of evidence. Case went cold." Max stood suddenly, stretching, then moved to Ethan's side and let out a quiet whine. Ethan stared at the wall, then down at his hands. He had the shape of a possibility now, not just suspicion, but a name, a place, a timeline. "Joe," he said, voice steady, "I need you to send me the missing persons file. Full report. Photos, birthmarks, anything. I'll send what I can. You planning to notify local authorities?" "Not yet. Not until I know for sure." "Be careful, Miller," Joe said, his tone no longer casual. "You know better than most. People like this don't snap politely." "I've got Max." There was a pause. Then, dry as sand, Joe said, The dog who once bit a Taliban scout and dragged your half-dead body back to the jeep? Yeah, I'd say you're covered. They hung up. Ethan leaned forward and pulled open a drawer containing a small black case. Inside was a discreet field recorder, motion-activated with infrared capability. He used it once during a security job for a military widow whose son had gone missing during a custody dispute. It had saved the child's life. Now he intended to use it again. By late afternoon, Ethan walked with Max past Building 17 again. This time he wore a gray hooded sweatshirt, a ball cap pulled low over his forehead. Max wore no harness, just his collar, blending in like any other city dog. The complex was quiet again. An old man exited apartment 16, carrying a grocery bag filled with apples and newspaper. He was thin, mid-70s, wore thick round glasses, and nodded at Ethan politely. "Afternoon," the man said. "Sir," Ethan replied, nodding back. The man continued toward the bus stop. Max led them to the back side of the building, to the same window he had scratched at before. Ethan crouched. The curtain was still shut tight. He pressed the small recorder under the window ledge, securing it with adhesive tape, positioning the mic just beneath a rusted vent slit. The device was silent, dark, almost invisible. "Let's go," he whispered to Max. Back home, Ethan laid out the new details like puzzle pieces across his table. The timeline fit. The name Diane Taylor didn't hold up. The missing child from Chicago. The secrecy. The lack of records. The boy's silent call for help. Max jumped up onto the worn sofa, curled into himself, and let out a soft snore. Ethan sat nearby, not touching the coffee now cold, eyes scanning the open file Joe had just emailed. Noah Carter, age 6, brown hair, gray-blue eyes, 3-inch faint birthmark under right earlobe, triangular in shape. He exhaled. That was what he saw. The boy from the park. Ethan stared at Max for a long moment, then whispered, "You knew before I did, didn't you?" Max opened one eye and thumped his tail once against the cushion. The late morning sunlight crawled gently across the kitchen counter as Ethan sat by the window, the small black audio recorder clutched in his hand. It had run through the night beneath the window of apartment 12B, and now the playback looped in his ears. An eerie, unsettling symphony of soft creaks, footsteps, and intermittently, the voice of a woman talking to someone in a tone that swung violently from syrupy to sharp. Ethan sat still, jaw clenched, as one particular phrase echoed back. "Noah is gone. You're not him. You're Lucas now. Don't look outside again." Max sat at Ethan's feet, his thick tail slowly brushing across the floor. He tilted his head, watching his human with quiet intensity. When the volume rose in the recording, when the woman snapped or something slammed, Max's ears would twitch, his posture growing stiffer. It wasn't barking that told Ethan Max understood something was wrong. It was the silence. Max had been trained to detect emotional distress, and every fiber of him now signaled alert. Ethan stopped the recording and turned to his laptop. He opened the file Joe had sent the night before. Noah Carter, missing since age 4, taken from Lincoln Park in Chicago while under the care of his mother. Ethan read through the police report again. No witnesses, no camera footage, and no ransom. The mother, Emily Carter, had been under scrutiny for months afterward, until media pressure and public sympathy dried up. The case was eventually closed due to lack of leads. He clicked into the secondary file, Emily Carter, now 36. A single mother with no criminal record. Former children's librarian. Soft-spoken. No history of substance abuse or mental health concerns. After Noah's disappearance, she had relocated to the outskirts of Missoula, Montana, living in near isolation. Ethan found her most recent mailing address from a public library registration. He hesitated for a moment. Then he opened a secure line and made the call. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then picked up. "Hello." The voice on the other end was gentle but cautious, worn down by the kind of patience that stops being hope and becomes habit. "Ms. Carter?" Ethan said, careful with his tone. "My name is Ethan Miller. I'm a retired Marine. I believe I may have seen your son." There was silence, flat, dead silence. Then the air seemed to change. Who gave you this number? She asked. Is this a joke? Because, it's not a joke, he interrupted. I've been following a boy I saw here in Portland. He made a distress signal, 3 fingers behind his back. I served on hostage recovery teams. That signal's not random. Another long pause. I've had people call before, she said, her voice thinner now, almost shaking. They said they saw him at gas stations, on buses. Once someone sent me a picture from a beach in California. It wasn't him. I wanted it to be, but it wasn't. I understand, Ethan said. But I saw his face. He looked straight at me like he needed help. He has a faint triangular birthmark under his right ear. I saw it, and he was holding the strap of his backpack exactly like the description in your file. I think it's him. Her voice faltered. The triangle, she whispered, almost to herself. Noah always scratched it when he was nervous. I used to tell him it looked like a secret badge. Ethan waited. I need a photo, she finally said, struggling to hold herself together. Something. Anything. I'll get you one, Ethan promised. But I wanted to call first. I didn't want to give you false hope. But I had to let you know someone sees him. There was a sound, faint and muffled, her hand likely covering the phone as she tried not to cry. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but fierce. I'll come to Portland. You don't have to rush, Ethan said. I know you've waited so long. No, she cut in. I've waited long enough. If there's even a 1% chance that it's him, I'll be there. Don't tell anyone else. Not yet. Let me see him. Just let me be there. Book your flight, Ethan said. I'll pick you up. She hung up without another word. But Ethan knew. That kind of silence only came from someone who had cried every tear and now ran on sheer will. He turned toward Max, who rose and padded over to press his nose into Ethan's palm. We're not alone in this anymore, bud. By evening, Ethan received a message from Emily, a digital photo taken on Noah's 3rd birthday. The boy sat beside a stuffed fox, wearing overalls and a paper crown. His eyes, storm gray deep, mirrored those of the child Ethan had seen. A smudge of frosting sat on his nose. Under his right ear, clearly visible, was the faint triangle birthmark. But it wasn't the birthmark that got to Ethan. It was the way the boy clutched the straps of his little backpack, knuckles tight, even in celebration, as if even then, he feared it might be taken away. Ethan printed the photo and pinned it to his bulletin board next to the map of the neighborhood. Later that night, he sat outside on the back steps with Max beside him, staring out into the fog drifting over the streetlights. They sat like that for nearly an hour. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and a single, distant siren whined through the silence. He closed his eyes. For 2 years, the world had turned without noticing a missing boy. For 2 years, a mother had whispered, "I miss you," into the void. Now the balance had shifted. Tomorrow she would come, and they would see. The sun hung lazily above the city park, casting long shadows across the open field as golden light filtered through the thinning canopy of oaks. Spring had begun to tiptoe into Portland, and the smell of damp soil mingled with the sweetness of distant cherry blossoms. Families dotted the park, joggers, mothers with strollers, old men feeding pigeons, each cocooned in their own world. Ethan Miller sat on a bench near the central fountain, a paper bag resting casually on his lap and Max lying at his feet. Max was calm, his sleek black and tan body curled in a lazy half circle, but his ears were lifted, his dark eyes scanning with the sharpness of an old soldier still standing watch. Ethan's clothing was simple, denim jeans, hiking boots, a brown jacket zipped halfway, and a baseball cap pulled low. He appeared like any other man enjoying a peaceful afternoon, but his fingers gripped the paper bag just tightly enough to show intent. Inside the bag was a candy bar clearly labeled contains peanuts, not lethal, but powerful enough to test what no words could confirm. From his position, Ethan had a clear view of the path leading from Morrison Lane, where he knew the routine well by now. Diane Taylor, real name Rachel Young, always took the boy for a short walk around 3 p.m., looping around the playground before returning to Building 17. She was punctual to a fault, always wearing the same pale blue cardigan and navy jeans, her posture prim and rehearsed like someone trying to imitate motherhood from a textbook. At 3:04, the beige sedan pulled up near the curb. The door opened, and Diane emerged with her usual clipped grace. She was in her early 40s, average height, thin lips, and light blonde hair cut just below the ear in a precise, no-nonsense bob. Her expression was soft but hollow, as if every smile were a mask stretched too tightly. Beside her, holding her hand, walked the boy, small frame, brown hair slightly overgrown, a red hoodie zipped to the collar, and that same gray-blue backpack slung over his shoulders. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground, and his head stayed bowed. Ethan's heart kicked once in his chest as he watched them approach. Max raised his head slowly, but didn't move. Diane glanced at Ethan as she passed, her eyes flicking toward him, unrecognizing but polite. She offered a slight smile, the kind strangers give when they don't wish to speak. Ethan stood slowly. "Hi," he said, keeping his tone light. "Nice day, huh?" Diane nodded. "Beautiful. Finally some sun." Max remained at Ethan's side, unmoving but observant. His eyes didn't leave the boy. "Is this your son?" Ethan asked, feigning casual interest. The woman straightened slightly. "Yes, Lucas. He's a little shy around new people." Lucas, the boy, looked up briefly at the sound of his name. His eyes landed on Ethan, then on Max, and finally on the bag in Ethan's hand. A flicker of something passed over his face. Not fear, exactly. Not recognition. But something guarded. Ethan smiled and opened the bag. He pulled out the candy bar, held it up gently. "Would you like one of these? I brought a few, but I don't eat much sweets anymore." Before the woman could reply, the boy took a step back. Just half a step. Barely a shuffle. But his body tilted away, his eyes locked on the label as if it were a live wire. He didn't speak, but his hand rose reflexively to clutch the strap of his backpack, tight, like it grounded him. "No, thank you," Diane said quickly, her voice clipped. "Lucas has a sensitive stomach. We're careful with his diet." Ethan nodded, slipping the bar back into the bag. "Of course. Just being polite." But his eyes remained on the boy, who now glanced back up at him. Their gazes met. For a single second, the world around them blurred. And then Ethan saw it. The child's lips pressed tight, his knuckles white where they gripped the backpack, but more than anything, the dart of his eyes. To the candy, to Diane, to Max, then back to Ethan, like he was pleading without speaking. A flicker of wind stirred the boy's hoodie just enough to reveal the base of his neck. Smooth, pale skin, and just under his right earlobe, a faint mark. A triangle. Max stood slowly. He stepped forward once, deliberately, and sat again just beside the boy's feet. His head tilted slightly upward, eyes locking with the child's. The dog didn't bark, didn't move further. He simply watched, breathing slow, steady. The boy turned his head slightly and reached one hand down, not to pet Max, but to let his fingers brush the fur behind Max's ear. It was hesitant, unsure. But Max didn't pull away. Diane's hand clamped gently on the boy's shoulder. "We should be going," she said, her tone lighter now but underscored by finality. "Of course," Ethan said. "Nice meeting you both." Diane nodded and led the boy away. But just before they turned the corner, the child looked back over his shoulder, his eyes finding Ethan again. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. Ethan stood motionless until they disappeared around the trees. Only then did he sit back down, Max returning quietly to his feet. He pulled the candy bar from the bag again, reading the label like it contained a code. "Peanut allergy," he muttered. She wouldn't have known to say sensitive stomach unless she'd rehearsed that line. Max whined softly. Ethan looked down at him. "You saw it too." In his mind, Ethan replayed a moment from years ago. Afghanistan, a moonless night, a suspect hiding in a hut. Max had been ready to strike, teeth bared, but paused mid-leap. A baby barely crawling had been used as a human shield. Max had frozen, snarled, and shifted position, standing protectively instead of attacking. The mission had failed, but no one died that night. Max knew where lines were drawn. Today, Max had drawn the same line. Not between enemies and allies. Between harm and innocence. Back at home, Ethan typed a message to Emily, saw the boy today. Offered him peanut-based candy. He reacted with silent fear. The woman deflected. I'm sure. We're getting close. By midnight, Morrison Lane had emptied into stillness. Street lamps buzzed faintly overhead, casting sepia halos onto the damp pavement, and the curtains of Building 17 remained drawn tight, as if guarding secrets too fragile for light. Ethan sat alone in his dim kitchen, elbows resting on the table, headphones over his ears. Max lay nearby in the hallway, not sleeping, just watching, one ear tilted in Ethan's direction, his tail twitching now and then with unease. The audio recorder placed beneath the windowsill of apartment 12B had captured just over 6 hours of activity. The first hour was nothing but the mundane, soft footsteps, the occasional hum of a refrigerator, distant plumbing noises. But around 10:48 p.m., something changed. A voice, feminine, Diane's, entered the recording. At first, it was gentle, almost melodic, but soon the tone twisted. "Tommy doesn't exist anymore," she said. "You hear me? Tommy is dead. You're Lucas now. Lucas listens. Lucas doesn't ask. Lucas doesn't look out the window." A soft thud followed. Then the boy's voice, barely above a breath. "I'm sorry." Diane's voice sharpened into venom. "If you look outside again, I will lock you in the closet all night." Ethan closed his eyes, jaw locked tight. The words weren't screams. They weren't threats shouted in chaos. They were cold, rehearsed, like a ritual spoken 100 times. And it made it worse. More deliberate. More real. He clicked pause and exhaled through his nose. It wasn't enough. Not legally. No direct physical violence. No proof of illegal custody. Just a voice and a boy with no documentation. He sent the audio file to the non-emergency tip line for Portland PD along with an anonymous message, but he knew what would happen. Or more precisely, what wouldn't. Without a search warrant or visual proof of abuse, the law wouldn't intervene. Not yet. Max approached, sensing his frustration. The dog pressed his head against Ethan's thigh, a silent, grounding gesture. Ethan rested a hand on Max's neck. "We heard the truth," he said softly. "But that's not the same as proving it." The next morning, Ethan drove to the small law library inside the Oregon Veterans Center. The building was old and quiet, its stone walls lined with shelves of federal and state manuals. The receptionist was a man in his 60s named Harold, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and tortoiseshell glasses. He didn't ask questions when Ethan signed in, just offered a quiet nod and returned to his crossword. Ethan settled into the back computer lab, where he could work without being seen. He dug deeper into Diane's past, or rather Rachel Young's. Her trail stretched across 3 states, but always under different combinations of her maiden and middle names. She had worked briefly at a child development center in Evanston, Illinois, before being dismissed under vague circumstances. The personnel file had been sealed after a civil complaint was settled privately. No charges, no conviction. Then in 2019, she moved to a small town outside Chicago, Elm Ridge, where she volunteered at a private daycare run by a woman named Mrs. Bellington. It was there that Ethan found a chilling note attached to an archived local blog post. Parents allege inappropriate emotional attachment shown by volunteer worker toward specific male student. Case dismissed. Volunteer relocated. Noah. Every piece clicked into place now like rusted teeth on a turning gear. Rachel Young had fixated on a child. The same child who vanished later that year. The same child Ethan had watched hesitate in front of a peanut candy bar. He printed everything. Highlighted the school complaint, the missing person report, the photo of the triangle-shaped birthmark. He scanned them into a single PDF and sent them to himself with the subject line, "Proof of pattern, Rachel Young aka Diane Taylor." Back home, Ethan spread the printouts across the table like a crime board. Max watched silently from the hallway, nose twitching as if trying to track ghosts. Later that evening, Ethan returned to Morrison Park. This time, he sat farther back, watching the apartment building from the shaded corner beneath a cedar tree. The light inside 12B flickered briefly as a curtain shifted. He raised his binoculars and watched. For a brief moment, the boy appeared at the window, barely illuminated by a yellow lamp inside. His face looked blank, lips pressed in a line, eyes glassy. His hand touched the curtain edge, just for a second. Then Diane appeared behind him. She bent down, whispered something in his ear, and led him away. The curtain dropped again. Ethan lowered the binoculars. His hand went immediately to Max's head, his fingers curling into the fur between his ears. "She's trying to erase him," Ethan murmured. "Like she's rewriting him from the inside out." Max didn't move, but his breath grew heavier. He'd seen that look before, in refugee camps and military shelters, where the bodies were intact but the minds were crumbling. The quiet eyes of the two well-behaved. Back inside his truck, Ethan pulled out his phone and called a contact he hadn't spoken to in months. The voice that answered was warm, female, quick to laugh but sharp when it mattered. "Detective Sarah Hines." "Sarah, it's Ethan." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I figured you'd only call if something bad was happening." Sarah Hines was in her late 30s, auburn hair usually tied in a loose bun, a lean frame built more like a runner than a cop. She'd been with the Portland PD for over a decade, known for her tenacity and her utter refusal to let cases go cold without a fight. Ethan had met her when she helped vet a missing person lead for another vet's daughter. She hadn't solved the case, but she'd stayed with the family until it was closed. That alone earned Ethan's respect. "I need 5 minutes," Ethan said. "Talk." He told her everything. The signal, the audio, the fake name, the allergy test, the birthmark. Sarah was silent until the end. Then she said, "You have enough for a child welfare check. Maybe not a warrant, but enough for boots at the door. I'll make a call." "You didn't hear that from me. I owe you. You already saved my brother's life once in Kandahar. We're even." She hung up. Ethan sat in the dark for a long moment. He looked down at Max. "It's starting," he said. "We may not have kicked the door in, but the wind just shifted." The rain began around midnight. Not a gentle drizzle, but a hard, cold pounding that slapped against rooftops and turned gutters into miniature rivers. Lightning cracked above Portland like a jagged split in the sky, and for a moment, the entire street outside Building 17 was lit in a flash of white before vanishing again into the storm's shadows. Inside Ethan's truck, parked across the street with its headlights off, the only light came from the screen of his recorder. He sat in the driver's seat, rigid, headphones pressed tight. The latest feed from the device under the window of apartment 12B was crystal clear. Then came the voice. Not loud, not yelling, but edged like broken glass. "You looked again, didn't you?" It was Diane. The boy's voice trembled, barely audible. "I didn't, please." "You lied," she shrieked, and something heavy crashed against what sounded like wood. A beat later, scrambling, the unmistakable sound of a door slammed shut, and a muffled thump, someone falling. Ethan bolted upright. Max, curled in the passenger seat, lifted his head instantly. One low growl echoed in the cabin. A second voice came through the headphones, crying now. "Please, I'll be good." That was enough. Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the storm. He moved fast, every muscle in his body burning with urgency, and Max slept down beside him, soaked within seconds but undeterred. The world blurred with rain, thunder rumbled overhead, and Ethan felt the rush of adrenaline, old, familiar, deadly clear. He didn't bother with the front. He headed to the back alley where the fire escape ladder hung rusted above a sagging wooden fence. Ethan climbed, Max right behind him like shadow and breath. They reached the second-floor landing and crept across the narrow ledge to the kitchen window of 12B. Inside, the light flickered. No time. Ethan pressed his elbow through the glass. The pane cracked, shattered inward. He reached in, unlocked the latch, and slid the frame open. "Max," he whispered, and the dog darted through the opening without hesitation. Ethan followed. The apartment smelled of mildew, scorched cooking oil, and something older, stale, like sweat and fear. Max moved in total silence, nose down, leading them past the cluttered kitchenette, the overturned chair, and toward the hallway. A muffled whimper stopped them cold. Max snapped his head toward the bedroom door. Ethan eased it open, heart pounding. Inside was dim. The single bulb on the ceiling cast shadows that danced across the walls. In the corner stood a wardrobe. Old. Oak. Its door slightly ajar. Max padded forward, sniffed, then let out a low growl. Ethan flung the door open. Inside, huddled on a crumpled blanket, wrists tied, mouth taped, knees pressed to his chest, was the boy Noah. His eyes wide and brimming with tears. His body trembled, thin and pale under a layer of dirt. Ethan crouched. Hey, you're safe now. Noah flinched. Max stepped closer, gently brushing his snout against the boy's arm. Noah looked at the dog, recognition blooming in his eyes. It wasn't fear, it was something closer to relief. Ethan cut the tape. Noah's hands came free, but he didn't move. He just collapsed into Ethan's arms like a marionette with cut strings. And that's when the scream came. You don't get to take him. Diane's voice rang like a siren from the hallway. A second later, she appeared, face wild, hair clinging to her skin in wet tangles. In her hand gleamed a kitchen knife. You don't understand, she screamed. He's mine. He chose me. She lunged. Ethan barely had time to move before Max sprang forward. The German shepherd launched with precision, knocking Diane off balance, his jaws locking around her wrist just hard enough to disarm without maiming. The knife clattered to the floor. Diane screamed, trying to strike Max, but the dog held firm, pushing her down with his weight, his teeth bared inches from her face. Ethan grabbed Noah and backed them both into the hallway. The front door burst open. Police! Hands where we can see them. 3 officers rushed in, weapons drawn. Behind them, soaking wet, was Emily Carter. Emily was tall, willow-thin, her long auburn hair plastered to her face. She wore a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big and sneakers caked in mud. Her green eyes darted wildly until they landed on Noah. Noah, she cried. The boy's head snapped up. Mom! Emily dropped to her knees, arms outstretched. Noah ran. They collided in the center of the hallway, mother and son clinging to each other, both sobbing, trembling. I thought you were. Emily couldn't finish the sentence. Noah just nodded into her chest. I missed you. Behind them, Diane was being restrained by 2 officers. She kicked, spat, screamed incoherent words. He's mine. He's not yours anymore. I made him better. Before collapsing in tears, Max returned to Ethan's side, panting, but alert. One officer approached. You the one who made the call? Ethan nodded. Ethan Miller, former USMC. Emergency intervention under State Code 814-13C. The officer nodded. You just saved that boy's life. No, Ethan said. He looked down at Max. We did. A second officer emerged from the bedroom. You're going to want to see this, he said. They all entered the small room. Inside the wardrobe, they found more than just the blanket. There were granola bar wrappers, a half-empty water bottle, a flashlight, and a folded towel. A makeshift prison. A cage. Emily stood in the doorway, arms around Noah, staring in horror. She kept him here, she whispered. Like an animal? Ethan didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Rain still poured outside, but inside, a different storm had passed. And something better had begun. The rain had passed. For the first time in weeks, Portland basked beneath a gentle spring sun, and the air tasted of blooming dogwood and new beginnings. Trees stretched their arms skyward, the city sidewalks freshly washed by last week's storm, and a breeze carried laughter from the nearby park into the quiet courtyard of the St. Vincent's Center for Child Recovery. The building itself looked more like an old boarding school than a hospital. Red brick walls, green-painted window frames, and a little weathered gazebo in the garden where therapy sessions sometimes took place when the sky was kind. Children played quietly in the main yard, their voices soft, like they were still learning how to trust the outside world. Inside, down a long hallway where sun pooled on the wooden floors, Noah Carter sat cross-legged on a rug with a blank expression and a handful of Legos he hadn't touched. It had been 7 days since his rescue. 7 days since he'd last spoken. Not even a whisper. Therapists came and went, kind and patient, offering warm smiles and art supplies. He nodded. He followed directions. But his eyes remained guarded, like he was still inside that closet in apartment 12B. Then came Ethan. He walked through the front door holding a small wooden box in one hand, and Max trotted beside him, tail low and polite, his black and tan fur freshly brushed, nails trimmed, wearing a soft blue therapy harness the staff had requested. Ethan had shaved and changed into a navy polo and jeans, simple but tidy. He looked less like a soldier today, and more like an uncle dropping off a gift. But his eyes still held the storm. The staff at reception smiled. "You're the vet, right?" one asked. She was in her early 30s, short blonde curls, a floral name badge that read Cassie Child Advocate. Ethan nodded. "I brought something for Noah." Cassie softened. "He's out back. Hasn't said much, but he looks for the door every morning around this time." Ethan exchanged a glance with Max. They found Noah under the shade of the large oak tree in the garden, a therapist sitting beside him on a bench, young, red-haired, with a calm presence. She smiled when she saw Ethan and Max approach, then stood and stepped back without a word. Noah didn't look up. His hands were in his lap, fingers rolling the same small rubber band over and over. Ethan sat beside him quietly. Max lay down at his feet, resting his chin on his front paws, watching the boy. Ethan opened the wooden box. Inside was a handcrafted balsa wood airplane, painted in forest green with a silver nose and little red tips on the wings. "I used to make these in the field," Ethan said softly. "Help calm my nerves. Thought you might want to finish painting it." He set it gently beside Noah, then added a small paintbrush and 2 bottles of acrylic paint, blue and yellow. Noah didn't touch it, but after a long minute, he tilted his head. "Is that for me?" he whispered, voice scratchy with disuse. Ethan didn't react. He just nodded. Noah reached out, brushed his fingers along the smooth edge of the wing. Max stood and stepped forward, ears perked. Noah looked at the dog, slowly, deliberately, and then his lips moved. "Can I call him my friend?" he asked, barely audible. Ethan turned. His heart stopped for half a beat. "Yes," he said quietly. "Max would like that." The boy smiled. Just slightly. But it was real. Not painted. Not polite. A flicker of sunlight through an overgrown window. It was the first time since the rescue anyone had seen Noah smile. Later that evening, Ethan received an envelope slipped under the door of his apartment. Inside was a letter from Emily Carter, written in neat handwriting on lined paper. "Mr. Miller, you didn't just find my son. You saw him. When no one else believed he was still out there, you listened for him. You knew how to see past the silence, and because of that, he's alive. Because of that, I'm a mother again. I used to think prayers went unanswered. I don't anymore. Thank you for everything." Ethan stared at the words for a long while. Then he placed the letter on the shelf next to his medals. It meant more than any of them. The next morning, another envelope came, this time from the center. Inside was a drawing on construction paper, rough lines in crayon but unmistakably expressive. It showed a tall man in a brown jacket, standing beside a German shepherd, beneath a tree with red and orange leaves. The man's hand rested on the dog's head. Beside them stood a boy with a small backpack. At the bottom, in a child's blocky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for seeing me when I was hidden from the world. Noah." Ethan showed the drawing to Max. The dog sniffed it, then gave a small, approving huff. That evening, Ethan folded the paper and tucked it into his wallet. Somewhere outside, a breeze stirred the spring leaves and Portland felt, for once, a little brighter. And maybe that's the real miracle, that in a world where so many pass by, where silence hides pain and shadows bury innocence, God still sends us unlikely angels. Sometimes they come in uniform. Sometimes they come with pause. And sometimes they arrive in the exact moment someone dares to whisper, "Please don't leave me here." Noah was never truly invisible. He was seen by a wounded soldier, by a loyal dog, and by the one who sees even the smallest sparrow fall. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Don't turn away. Listen closely, because someone near you may be waiting for a rescue, and you might be the answer to their prayer. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who believes in second chances. Drop a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and divine timing, type Amen. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us God's mercy walks beside us, sometimes on 2 legs and sometimes on 4. May God bless you, protect those you love, and remind us all, no one is ever truly forgotten.